Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in about 3 minutes. Does anyone need a mic check or sound check, video check? Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good.
Good morning, Pat. I was just sending you a message to see who C70 was. Thank you for identifying yourself.
Just me. Happy to be here.
Okay, thank you.
That's his agent code name, like 007. So
Oh, that's a good one.
I wish I were that slick.
Good morning, everyone. The little atomic clock on my computer says it's exactly 10:30. So hopefully this is going to be short and sweet. We have almost perfect attendance lined up. So we'll give everybody a minute to get make sure everybody's had a chance to check in, and then we'll let Chairman Lawrence open the meeting.
Yvonne, I think we're good.
Okay, I think that might be everybody if I am capable of counting little boxes and a list of names properly, which some days, you know, the odds of that are better than others. But anyway, good morning, welcome. I quickly introduce Senator Tartaglione has a new staff person who's attending on her behalf, and that would be Nathan McClellan. And he's joining us for the first time today. Other than that, I think let's rock and roll.
all right. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone.
I'm not hearing anybody because my sound is turned all the way down. I'm sorry. Okay.
All right. I was not talking about you, Yvonne. I was saying good morning to everyone. Welcome to everyone. It's good to see you. Thanks for making the time today. And welcome to Mr. McClellan as well. So we have one item to discuss today, and that's our report on mail-in ballots. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Yvonne, and why don't you walk us through it?
To this point.
Okay. What?
Have all of our with top borough officials, public works, borough manager.
I can ask everyone to mute if they're not speaking.
All,
that would be great. If you can mute if you're not speaking, that would be.
Thank you, Ken. I'm sitting here thinking the voices in my head have really gotten loud. So, anyway, yes, what we've done is, if you will recall, we had our work groups, and work group 4 was looking at mail-in ballots and had had written a report that laid out the different aspects of mail-in ballots, the identified problems and some possible ways to resolve them. When we met late summer, we discussed the various aspects of that as a whole, the board appeared to have a consensus. I will not claim unanimity. Unanimity does not exist in the political world, I don't think, unless maybe now Putin can't even get unanimity anymore. So no government works in perfect unanimity, but we seem to have consensus around certain proposals that would improve the mail-in ballot process and address some of the concerns that have been raised since the process was added to Pennsylvania. So what we've done is coming out of that meeting, we took all the research that was presented to the work group, put that in a narrative form in the report that basically explains where some of the information came from, what are some of the issues that have led to this whole discussion and the proposals. And that's the narrative part. The recommendations then are the various proposals that we felt we heard agreement on as ways to address some of the issues with mail-in ballots. We drafted them as individual amendments to the election code, one topic per amendment, mostly because we have found that if you try to put a variety of changes, even within the same subject matter like election law, and present a single piece of legislation in one of our reports, chances are it's going to get taken apart anyway, because different people have different interests and different members of the General Assembly may wish to sponsor some, but not all aspects. So each proposal was done as an individual piece of legislation. Overall, I think we memorialized what the board had felt was appropriate. I will say with drop boxes, we did a real skeleton type of provision. And I'm sure there will be other things that people down the road may want to add to that. We tried to piggyback off of some of the stuff the Department of State had done. We looked at what some other states had done with drop boxes, and of course, all the different aspects of it we had discussed in our meetings. So, there is a piece there that would officially authorize drop boxes, which is not currently the case in our statute, and put some very simple standards, minimum standards out there for how drop boxes should be dealt with. And probably the biggest issue was making it optional for counties, that if a county felt they needed it, fine. If they didn't, that was at their discretion. So at this point, I would just like to open the floor to any concerns anybody has. My ultimate goal here is to have everybody say their piece, tell us if there's anything about what we put together that you don't like, that you would like to convince your co-members that maybe we shouldn't be doing. Have that conversation, and at the end of this meeting, have this board vote to release this report with these proposed legislative recommendations for the General Assembly to do with what it chooses. And assuming we come out of this meeting today with that approval, we'll have the report out before the end of the month so that it will be there as the new General Assembly comes into session and begins its work, and hopefully can start addressing these kind of issues right away. And I see, Lisa, you have your hand up.
Hi, sorry for my quick draw on the hand up. I thought
That's okay.
I thought you were going to ask for any comments, so I apologize for going first. First of all, I think the report it definitely demonstrates a tremendous amount of exceptional work. So thank you so much for the whole staff and just for compiling this report, which is really a very impressive document. And it fully illustrates the amount of hard work and deliberation that went into it. So I want to thank everybody. And I'm most happy to see the part about the undated ballots and the secrecy envelope, because everybody knows how passionate I am about those two issues. But I would just like to also just mention for the group that when we consider the recommendation to move the dates for the mail-in ballots, we should recognize the need to have two dates, one for people to mail in their application, but we shouldn't impede people's ability to come in person to get a mail-in ballot, because we know that one of the reasons why we have to move these deadlines is because of the postal service deficiencies, and we shouldn't, our voters shouldn't have to suffer that because, you know, we had to make these changes. And I know just in Philly, we see our longest lines at our County Board of Elections towards the end, where people have been waiting and still want to take advantage of the opportunity to vote by mail. So I would just say that maybe we have two deadlines, one for people to apply by mail and one for people to apply in person. And Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. This is a great report. Thank you.
Oh, I just got a note from Wendy because she keeps me in line. When I was making announcements earlier, we also want to congratulate Thomas Kutz, who is no longer a township commissioner in Lower Allen, but has become the state representative in the 87th district. So Thomas, sorry about that. I did get your email recently, but that's Wendy is my memory. So congratulations on your election, and we will reflect your current position in our membership list.
Thank you. It's an honor to serve, and hope that, you know, my experience coming into the General Assembly will benefit this board and the constituents we all serve in the Commonwealth as we can continue to consider improvements to our election laws. Thank you very much.
All right, other comments? Pat.
Thanks, Yvonne. First, I think I just have to echo what Commissioner Deely pointed out. I think it's a terrific report. Reflects very well on the staff, all the hard work done there, and then the deliberations of this board and the work group that got us here. So from top to bottom, I think it's a really solid report. I guess just a couple points on the request deadline. It was definitely the consensus that I can recall of moving the request deadline back to, you know, somewhere between 12 to 14 or 12 to 15 days. And if that's, of course, coming from, I thought predominantly from the counties that are, of course, in such a tough spot right now between running these in-person and mail-in elections. I know maybe the vast majority of the advocates out there would prefer to keep the deadline at 7 days. And there actually are, most other states keep it at 7 days, which I guess is one of the points I wanted to raise, not to contest the 12 to 15 day recommendation, but there's a line in there about moving it back would align us with most of the country. And actually, if we move back to 12 or 13 or 14, we'd be getting towards the deeper side. So just suggesting a little bit different framing, I guess, around that change, and the fact that it's needed because of the position that the counties are put in. I guess to Commissioner Deely's point about requests are put in, I guess, electronically or via mail, like a paper application, versus requests are made in person. I agree. I think that would be preferable. There are a number of other states that do that. So, for example, I guess we would be theoretically keeping the in-person request deadline at the 7 day mark, and then moving the remote request deadline to, again, 12 or 13 or 14 days out. And as Commissioner Deely suggested, we'll give voters a bit more time to have that in-person option if that's the way they wanted to go. So would welcome discussion or debate around that point. I guess this morning if there's time.
Well, you want to talk about it? I mean, we can amend the report if you want to add that provision in there. My impression from the counties was, even with the in-person, that having that many people coming into the offices that close to election day still jams up the offices and has a lot of people in your office when you're trying to get ready for the in-person election itself, voting itself. But Jonathan, who, by the way, I see you in the news a lot of late.
I don't know whether that's good or bad. No, thank you, Yvonne. And as Commissioner Daly said, and Pat said, I agree. It's a great report, and really appreciate all the hard work that went into drafting it. On this point of having, I guess, a bifurcated deadline, one for mail and in person, you are correct, Yvonne. I think one of the county's concerns regarding the deadline is sort of the back end of the process and marking the poll books and making sure the poll books are up to date. And I think this points out one of the issues with our election infrastructure. All of this becomes a lot easier if counties have electronic poll books, because they can sync things up. They don't have to worry about printing. In some larger counties, that printing has to occur earlier than in smaller counties. So not every county is doing it at the same time. So I know that's another concern, among county election officials. But I do think it makes sense to have a separate deadline for in-person applications versus mail, because the underlying issue that we're trying to resolve, aside from some of the administrative challenges, I think even the counties, the underlying issue they're trying to resolve is the time it takes mail to travel from the county to the voter, and back to the county. And I think this addresses that, while preserving the ability of somebody to apply in person up through 7 days before election day. So I do like the idea of, at least proposing, a possible, bifurcated deadline, one for submitting a mail request versus one for coming in person. Because keep in mind, they're in most cases, when they show up in person to apply, they're going to receive the ballot at that time. They're going to vote it and they're going to return it. So the whole process will be taken care of, and the counties will not necessarily be processing that ballot, the day before the election or election day, because they'll already have it in hand.
Okay, county people, Joe, Dan, is that something that appeals to you guys?
Well, I'll start off. First of all, before I start, Yvonne, I'm sorry I missed the announcements. I wanted to thank everybody who sent condolences to my family. It was much appreciated. So thank you for that. I would say that, obviously anything we can do to move the deadline back on the mail-in applications is going to help us. Not on the applications, on the ballots. I'm sorry. Do I like the idea of having two separate dates? I'm not in love with the idea, but anything we can do to get our staff more time to process those ballots and focus on the in-person election is going to be a step forward.
Dan? And
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. I would concur with Commissioner Cantz. Thank you.
Ken?
Yvonne,
I was
this is-
muted. Yeah, I agree with both Joe and Dan. 2 dates is not ideal, but realistically, you have people who are waiting and they're not going to get their ballots back in time. And what I think people tend to forget too is that we have to plan for an in-person election as well. So the longer that we're waiting and pushing and people are doing that, we're already pulling people as well. So I think the report, let me just say overall is excellent. But on this point, while it's not necessarily ideal, I think it's necessary to have the 2 dates.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's Bruce Erb. I would agree with that as well. I mean, I think we find that, again, the people that show up to do it in person, we already, at least in our county, have booths set up that they can go in and vote. No one takes it with them virtually. They vote at that time. As long as I realize that's a problem in some counties that don't have physical facilities for their elections offices that are laid out that way. We're fortunate enough to do so, but it really is going to eliminate the 12, 14 days, whatever, is really going to eliminate extensive amount of labor in the process. And as a result, in the counting process, there's absolutely, this would be a great improvement. Maybe not perfect, but great.
All right, so I think I'm hearing that everybody, some people would think it's great and some people could live with having a bifurcated deadline. And if that is an accurate assessment, we'll amend the provision that we've prepared in the report to have the 12 to 15 day, and we left that kind of a window for because among ourselves, we couldn't pick an exact day. So we figured we'd leave it up to the General Assembly to pick the number of days for that, but then leave the in-person at 7 days before, which is the way it is now. If everybody is comfortable with that, or at least can live with that, could I just see a quick show of hands? Because then we'll add that. Oh, I can't count. 1, 2, 3. I think, yeah, I think we're okay with that. I would not say it's an overwhelming majority, but I think I'm seeing enough hands that people will be okay with that. And the bottom line is, when it gets to the General Assembly, they will, again, listen to input from people like yourselves and finding that more. But I think it's probably generally better to offer more and let them narrow it than narrow it on our own and then move on. So I think we're okay with that. Nathan, did I see your hand?
No, sorry, I was figuring out how to raise my hand forward. So you can count me in that
okay.
In the affirmative there. So
okay, good.
Apologize for that.
Oh no, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a technologically happy person, but here we are, we're Zooming. So I think Jesse had his hand up.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily opposed to what we're talking about here, but one of the concerns I have is, I think one of the reactions to the way in which mail-in voting seems to be being administered by individuals coming into the voting office, asking for the mail-in vote, filling it out at that time, and then immediately returning it, is that mail-in voting has kind of morphed into early voting. And there's a difference between mail-in voting that we have here in Pennsylvania, like early voting in Georgia. And I would think it's important for this board to try to cut those two things apart and not mash them together, because I think that can create some confusion. So although I'm open to discussing this issue, I would think it would be better done not by us trying to, again, smash early voting and mail-in voting together, but separating those out and maybe considering them individually and going through them. So I would hope that in the future, we'd be willing to look at those two things as separate concepts and evaluate the legitimacy of them individually, as opposed to, kind of smushing them in. So a comment for the record, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you. And that actually, at least in my mind, supports the idea of bifurcating those deadlines, because you are then not completely, but at least pulling out some of those people who would be, what to my mind as well is de facto early voting in Pennsylvania, which is not statutorily
And maybe that's my concern, which is we're talking about creating something that's basically early voting, but all the other stuff that should go into early voting, such as partisan observers being able to watch the process, which we can't do right now, isn't being considered. So I don't want us to kind of be developing early voting, but doing it under the supposed auspice of mail-in voting, because I think there's a lot of additional considerations that need to be taken into account if we are going to have early voting, which is now what we're talking about, and no longer talking about mail-in voting. Thank you.
I think that is definitely going to be a separate agenda item that we need to talk about. I personally don't like it. I think it's a backhanded way to do early voting. And I like rules. So, but it's something I think we need to further explore about, if we are going to go that route, we need to be more specific about what that looks like. But in the interim, until we come up with some other way to deal with that, I think what we're doing now will work and maybe help separate that out a little bit more. Pat and Jonathan, I'm not sure which one of you had your hand up first.
I was going to say, I think Randall's had his hand up for a little while. Let me.
Oh, Randall, where'd you go?
I don't know where I went on your, I don't know where I went on your screen. I know where I'm at on my screen.
I see you now. I'm sorry.
No problem. I did not vote for the change just because I believe it is going to be rife for confusion with voters. Because the way it'll end up is Department of State will put out, with all due respect, Jonathan, Department of State will put out a schedule that the last day to apply for a mail-in ballot is X. The last day to apply for a mail-in ballot in person is Y. And then you will have people who, well, I'm doing it in person. I didn't do it online. You will have people who are dropping off their spouses, bringing their spouses' applications into the counter because I'm applying in person. I just think it's rife for confusion, and that's the last thing our voters need, which is why I watched the way people can in 2020 watch the way people view these things and parse these things out in their head, and I think it's going to be very difficult to have bifurcated deadlines that are not creating voter confusion, at least initially.
All right, now Pat and Jonathan duke it out.
John, you want to go first?
No, go ahead. You had your hand up first, Pat.
I had a question for the group, and I guess primarily the counties and the election officials, administrators here, because I can't recall exactly what the discussion was around the voter registration deadline and the mail-in request deadline potentially being on the same day. Let's say if they both landed at the 15-day mark. What the implications or challenges, if any, would be. I can't recall exactly what that discussion was, so I wanted to put that question back out to the group, and especially those folks who would actually have to do this, implement.
I think part of the discussion was that, that would not be ideal, but again, because we couldn't really come up with the perfect number of days to push back, the range we've given could result in that, but I think that's a discussion maybe better left to whatever committee would be considering that legislation, and have people like your group, Pat, and other groups come in and address that, because we did talk about it and we did say that would not be the perfect scenario, but at the same time, we really didn't hit a good resolution on it.
If I may, Pat, anytime you can request a absentee or mail-in ballot while voter registration is open, creates an opportunity for problems. And I'm not suggesting those deadlines necessarily, but if voter registration is closed and locked down in the primary, you're not moving, you're not changing precincts, then it makes the mail-in ballot part cleaner. Anytime the two are open simultaneously, you have the opportunity for people's changes. They go online, they change their address, and they request a mail-in ballot. And that you process the mail-in ballot request before you process the voter registration request. The ballot goes to the wrong location, they get the wrong ballot, whatever. Anytime the two are open simultaneously, there's an opportunity for an error. Just based upon timing of what gets processed when. I don't see closing on the same day necessarily as a problem. In an ideal world, voter registration would be locked down and done, and then mail-in ballots would occur to avoid that. Practically, that's not a realistic solution. I don't see them closing on the same day to create much challenge beyond that, that you have when you have the two open and being able to be changed simultaneously.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I'll address that. A few things that have been discussed over the past few minutes, and I did not take offense, Randall. I know we have debates internally about. I don't like using the word early to define what we do in Pennsylvania, because in most jurisdictions that means something radically different than what's actually happening here, and we've tried to push the term over the counter, vote by mail, other terms that are more descriptive of what actually happens. But on that last point, I don't have a strong, 12 days, 15 days. I hear what you're saying, closing registration and closing the at least mail deadline makes a lot of sense administratively. The reason I do feel strongly about having a separate in-person deadline is, we've seen the statistics over the years. The reality is there is a significant percentage of voters who don't think about voting until a week and a half, 2 weeks before election day. That's just the reality. We encourage people, if they have a job that pulls them away at a moment's notice, if they're working in the healthcare industry, they should think about voting by mail. But a lot of people prefer the vote in person, and it's only until that moment in time where they find out, oh, I'm not going to be around on election day, that they really think about voting by mail. And so I think you need to accommodate that. And I don't think pushing all of those voters into like the emergency absentee process would necessarily benefit the voter or even the county, because the emergency absentee process is a little more work for the county, and it actually obligates them to do things like, send someone from the sheriff's office out to deliver the ballot if the voter can't get the ballot themselves. So, that's why I feel pretty strongly about having a separate in-person deadline. I think most times we get the messaging right. It'll be confusing for some folks. I don't know that it'll be any more confusing than our current emergency absentee period versus the regular absentee period. So and I think over time people will acclimate themselves to it. So sorry, I know I covered like a good portion of the last 15 minutes there in one quick take.
That's fine. We like efficiency. So, okay, well, I think we're still at recommending bifurcating them, but I think we need to add a little more explanatory material about the kind of impacts that you guys have discussed and concerns about potential confusion. But I think we can fix that. We can write that. Can't do that. We'll fix it to make everybody happy. I will have to think about specifically how to do that, but I think we know what we need to do to make that look okay. I talk to myself a lot. I apologize. Sometimes I just have to think things through out loud, not answering myself, at least here right now. So that's good. I think, Joe, you had said there were a couple of things you wanted to comment on.
Yeah, I'm going to go to recommendation number 1 just real quickly. And these are just some things that, as I was reading over this, there's been a lot of information that has really, some of which has changed since our work group meetings, and some ideas that have come about since that time that I think are at least worth mentioning. Kind of like Jesse, I'd like to get them on the record, because I think that they're thought pondering for the future, if nothing else. And so I'll just touch on the permanent mailing list. I know that we all have issues with that, whether it's permanent or annual and whatnot. You know, we have a system at the state that allows a voter to sign up for following and tracking their ballot application and ballot. So why don't we use that same system for emailing that voter to also notify them at the beginning of the year? And maybe we're already doing this, Jonathan. I apologize if we are. To let them know that annual notification, rather than our staff having to gather thousands and thousands of postcards or letters to send out to the voters to let them know about the annual registration, why don't we use that email system to at least reach all of those folks who have registered an email address and notifying them that way? That would cut down on, number one, a lot of mail and a lot of time for our staff, and maybe taking those thousands of letters down to hundreds of letters. Just a thought. Or text messages for that matter.
Yvonne, may I respond just to outline? So Commissioner Katz, thank you. You're right, we do text messages and emails. The one challenge, aside from the fact that the law has a very specific requirement the counties have to meet, in many cases, those emails may be old, out of date, even the phone numbers, and we don't have an effective way to identify which ones are mobile numbers versus landlines. But we do send text messages out and emails out to people who are on the permanent list to let them know that they should be expecting a notification from their county, and kind of explaining very generally, these are usually short messages. They're a lot more cost effective than sending out letters, but they still cost money. So we generally keep them pretty brief. I guess my concern with that, I agree with sort of the thought behind it. The challenge is, how do we make sure that we have a good, accurate, up-to-date email or mobile number for the voter? Especially given the fact that much of that information was collected years ago from the voter and may be out of date.
Sure, I understand that and acknowledge that. But I also, on the reverse side of that, I know many people who have changed their addresses, but who have had the same cell number for 20 years. So again, it's all about the information, and it's only as good as the information we have in the system. And I'm just thinking that maybe, the new Shore system might have more capabilities to help analyze that data.
Yeah, we do have, the new system will have sort of ad hoc messaging. And right now we have to extract data from the system and work with a vendor to send out texts and emails. The new system, counties will actually be able to message their voters directly through the new system. So I think that will be helpful. Whether you can use that in lieu of a required mailing, as I said, is going to depend on how good the information is. Is it at least as good as the address? That may make the difference.
Yep, thank you. So that was my first point. The second point, Yvonne, was actually on recommendation number 3, and this is just a wording change that I think we might want to consider, to be very specific. And it's on page 13 of your report at the very, very bottom, the underlined portion. Use of the inner envelope is in the discretion of the voter. Failure to use the inner envelope shall not be the sole reason for disqualifying the ballot. I would recommend that we change the sole reason to a qualified reason, because there's a big difference there, I think.
I have no objections to that.
Or I'll give you another option I wrote down. Hang on, I have it on the other side of the paper. A qualified reason or an acceptable reason for disqualifying the ballot.
I prefer the second, Joe. This is Jim Smith. I'm sorry, Yvonne.
Oh, no, go right ahead.
Qualifying and disqualifying in the same sentence within 4 words is really confusing.
I agree. That's why I came up with the second option.
Okay. Again, we're writing statutes and trying to encapsulate what we've heard. We are not wedded to the exact words that we've chosen, and that's part of what we would hope you guys would point out. So I have no problem with that. Anybody object to changing that? Beautiful. I just want to point out real quick too, when we were talking about the permanent mailing list, that the Department of State has changed their website, and they don't call them permanent mailing lists anymore. They call them annual mailing lists. And I like to think that maybe, our discussions might have prompted some of that behavior. So, I like to take credit wherever and whenever I can find it. So just point that out, that I did notice that change not so long ago. Thank you, Joe. Next one.
Yeah, the next one is, I know, probably a little bit more discussion needed to have. And I know this was a deep discussion we did in our last meeting in person, and that's on the date of the ballot. Now, I'm not basing my judgment on this solely based upon the Supreme Court's decision, but I really more so based upon the fact that Jonathan knows this. In my county, we have a special election coming up, which is really, really burdensome to our staff, as you might imagine. To have 3 elections within 6 months, and a lot of the things that we've discussed, this has really brought some things to light to me just in the last couple of days. And so again, yeah, the Supreme Court decision might have made me think about it a little bit more, but here's my concern, and I think this is a valid concern, on not requiring a date, which is what we're proposing. Here's where that becomes a problem. We have already received in this last election in November, or I'm sorry, not the November election, the primary from last year, this year in 2022, we received ballots, a few, up until 3 months after the election, that we received them in our office. Here's where that becomes a problem. Those ballot envelopes look exactly the same as the ballot envelopes that we used in November, that we'll use in a special election on January 31st, that we'll use in a primary election in the spring, in May. How is it possible for our staff, number one, to determine if that ballot is from which election? And number two, more concerning, is the possible disenfranchisement of the voter, who, I don't know how this could happen, but I'm sure it can. A voter can request a ballot, they lay it on their counter, and for some reason they don't mail it back. Now they get the next election ballot, they lay it on their counter and they grab the wrong one and they send it back. They've now been disenfranchised because We did not require a date on the outside of that envelope to determine that it's from that election. So I'm just concerned about that possibility, which I never thought of before this, before in our work group discussions.
And these would be ballots that would not be opened by those staff people bringing them in. I'm just thinking that when the ballots are opened, every election, the ballot itself is different. So once the ballot was opened, wouldn't you be able to determine that it was or was not an appropriate ballot for that election? But Lisa and Christina, and I think in that order, both have their hands up. So Lisa.
Yeah, so we get ballots from previous elections quite frequently. But luckily, Sure is able to tell us, and the correspondence codes on the barcodes are able to tell us what election is corresponding to that ballot. So respectfully, that is not an issue with the current technology that we have.
Christina?
I agree with Lisa, but I can see where this idea comes from. And I get the idea that maybe there could be a notification or a color code. Like maybe we could simply color code the primary, the general, and special elections so that it is easy for officials to see as they are coming in. Because, without being able to do any type of canvassing in advance of election day, it's impossible to open the envelope. And if the Sure system is down and the scanner is not working, then you do not know which election it is from. So maybe a color code or something could be added or simply the name of the election, like general election, special election, primary election. I don't know if that's a thought, but maybe that's a way to fix this.
Randall had his hand up, and then I think Jonathan also has a response to that.
I had just sent out a chat, but the Sure barcodes, at least as of 2 years ago, and I'm sure that hasn't changed, will not scan for an election that's been closed out in Sure. So when you're processing that envelope, you're scanning the barcode on the back, it'll let you know at that point that it was from the wrong envelope. Now, interestingly enough, Joe brings up something, and he didn't quite take it to the next step, but voters will do that too, which is he was assuming the voter was keeping the right envelope with the right ballot. And if that happens, the voter sends in the right ballot for the right envelope for the election, whether it's dated or not, but with the wrong ballot in, when you open up that ballot, the ballot won't scan. It's not a legitimate ballot for that election. And so the voter, so when you have the two ballots on the counter, Joe, the voter keeping the right ballot with the right envelope, the chances are not real good once you've gotten to that level of disorganization to start with.
Jonathan and then Joe.
Yeah, I was, so Randall already provided the one response is systematically you won't be able to record the ballot. But if to Christina's point, it would be, we could certainly accommodate it on the label, ensure, putting the year of the election, the date of the election, or something like that. It might be easier to actually put it on the outer envelope itself. Because we have limited real estate on the labels, so adding anything to it. But if that would be helpful, I don't have any opposition to that. I don't think there's any reason that would necessarily be problematic, so that a county could, just with visual inspection, would be able to determine, hey, this is not a ballot from the current election cycle. But either way, it's not. There's no real issue with it, potentially being counted, because the system's not going to recognize the barcodes are unique to each election cycle.
Oh, just got a message from Jesse, who has to leave the meeting. He did send it to. Thank you, Jesse. We appreciate We appreciate your support and your hard work. Joe, I see your hand is still.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to respond. I understand what Lisa's saying, and I get that. The problem, however, would still exist if, you know, yes, the scanning is one thing. That would tell our staff that it's the wrong ballot envelope. The voter will not know that, however, and if the voter mails that in, that's a whole different issue. But if they're handing it in, I know you guys all know we don't use drop boxes in our county. We take them from the voter. But before we accept that, we ask them 2 questions. Is this your ballot? And do you have all the information on the outside of the envelope filled out, especially in this last election with the Supreme Court decision? However, if that information is not there, and we accept that ballot, and that voter walks away, and we open that ballot and it's the wrong ballot, now we have a problem, because now we have no way to know whose ballot that is. So there's no way to contact the voter whose vote now didn't count because they put the wrong ballot in the envelope. So I get it. This is a really slim chance that this could happen, but I know it could happen, and it probably has happened or will happen.
And I think that may be where we need may not be the proper word, but where this may resolve itself is dealing with dating the envelope is intended to not disenfranchise lots of people who make the very simple mistake of putting the wrong date, forgetting the date, thinking it's their birthday instead of the date, whatever, to really prevent the disenfranchisement of a fair number of people based on what we've seen and heard reported, that this is a problem that occurs pretty much statewide, and we need to address that. But I think fundamentally we can't provide and we can't prevent every mistake every voter makes. And at some point we hit a level of diminishing returns on how many people are going to be potentially disenfranchised versus with how many votes are we going to save and preserve and make sure everybody gets a chance to vote. So I understand your points. I could identify various members of my extended family who are perfectly capable of making those kind of mistakes. But at the same time, I think, what is the thing? Going for perfection, and the perfect is not the whatever. I don't know. I'm not good with votes. But anyway, I think those are legitimate concerns. I think we can't prevent people from being somewhat cavalier with their votes. And that is something we have discussed in some of these work groups in the past, is that voting is absolutely a right we want to preserve, but people also have to take some responsibility for their own behavior and their own handling of their ballots. And I think that's where the trade-off comes between the date versus other potential errors in preparing and returning a ballot. I mean, I forgot to fill out the backside of a ballot one time. And I mean, how stupid is that? And it's not like I haven't been looking at this kind of stuff for years and voting since I was 18. But I think that's where we see it. And that's where we're really aiming, is to, and again, Grant and I were discussing this earlier this morning. We're not gonna put the lid on this, because you still have the federal lawsuits with the civil rights violations. And that's something we legislatively cannot we cannot fix something that will prevent people from claiming their civil rights are being violated by whatever requirements we have to vote. And some of them are absolutely perfectly legitimate. Some of them, I believe some people would feel are a little frivolous, but the bottom line is we can't write the perfect statute that will prevent these federal lawsuits. But at the same time, we can propose legislation that generally helps protect the voting rights of most of our citizens, and dealing with dating the ballots should accomplish that goal to a greater degree than we're accomplishing it right now. So that's my speech. Dan and then Jonathan.
Thank you, Yvonne. I simply want to get in line behind Commissioner Cantz because he said he had a few issues to discuss. I don't want to jump ahead of him, but when he's through, I need to pose a concern or a question to Mr. Marks, if I may. So I'll sit tight until that opportunity arises. Thank you.
And this is the purpose of this meeting. You know, we need to make sure everybody's on board and ultimately say, okay, yay or nay, let's release this. So, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. I was just going to quickly note, I don't know if it was, I don't recall if it was said before. It should be noted who is impacted as well, and specific, based on all the data that we have available. These kind of errors seem to be impacting older voters, and you know, certain communities of you know, voters with disabilities, communities of color. You know, they seem to be overwhelmingly impacting specific groups of voters, and I think that's worth noting for the record as well.
Thank you, Jonathan.
And I will be happy to answer any questions Commissioner Vogler has later on in the meeting. So
yeah, I believe there was a study that came out not that long ago that was addressing that same disproportionality impact with some of these things. Joe, more things for you.
I don't have any other issues. I would echo what Jonathan just said. We definitely have seen the vast number of, I'll say, mistakes in a much older population, and because it's confusing to them and it's new. And I would submit, Jonathan, I know there is a lot of information on that label, but if we could somehow use that space, you know, we use the same envelopes over and over until we run out to try and save costs. So I know a lot of counties do that. So if at all possible to get it on that label, you know, even a date at the corner would be very helpful. Thank you.
Lisa.
I'm good. Sorry.
Oh, okay. The
May I raise my question now?
Yep, absolutely. Dan, you're up.
It does tie in with what a point Commissioner Cantz made and to which Jonathan responded.
Yep.
And I'll be brief. You discussed various means by which voters are communicated with, whether it be text messages, emails, etc. I would hope that the Commonwealth would keep in mind, at least in our county, and I'm sure in some others, here in Lawrence County, we have a growing number of voters and residents from the Amish community. And obviously, for reasons that they don't have access to some of the communication tools that many of us do have. So I guess, Jonathan, I just need a reassurance that the Commonwealth will keep that fact in mind, and that direct mail communication in this set of circumstances, and perhaps some others, will still be factored in. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we certainly appreciate it. And as I mentioned, I don't know that you could, we do the messaging to supplement, what the counties are doing and even other messaging that we do. We've been very careful over the years. When we have money in the budget to do voter outreach, we've been careful to do it, multiple different methods, radio, TV, even, digital signs along, major highways in the Commonwealth. We've done like the gas station toppers. We're trying to reach as broad a swath of Pennsylvania voters as possible. So, as I said to Commissioner Cantz earlier, I appreciate the thought. I don't know that in practice, though, you'd be able to replace direct mail, but you could certainly supplement it. And maybe if you want to keep costs down, maybe you could give voters the option, but you'd have to have a process in place to collect updated email or text address on a fairly frequent basis, and allow them to opt into that versus the paper. It would, it would require significant amount of thought. Otherwise, you're going to risk, as you said, disenfranchising those communities that still rely primarily on mail coming to them.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any other comments on anything in the report? Okay, then. Oh, Christina.
About the, I don't know if there's an echo. Sorry about that. There were a few issues that I had with regard to the Dropbox section, and being from the county that has the most drop boxes, I think I can speak to this. The Dropbox hours, it doesn't really state in there that Dropboxes can be 24/7. I think that's, it's pretty imperative there. The hours of operation. There is a section in there that states that the drop boxes would be closed at certain times. I don't know if that's for cleaning or whatnot, but that simply doesn't happen. You don't close a US Postal Service box. So you're not really closing a drop box unless that drop box is inside of a location, or if there's a particular to that drop box where it's not accessible at a certain time. Any ones that are outside 24/7 are operational throughout that time. If you've got someone working split shifts and the only time that they can drop that ballot off is at 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. when they're on their way home from work, they need to be able to have access to that box. The other thing that I would really like to see if we could move into a different section in the report is on page 36, there is a reference to ballot harvesting. And it states that ballot harvesting it falls under the Dropbox section. And my concern is that if we are talking about ballot harvesting, perhaps it should have its own section in the report, because ballot harvesting, as we could see with the case that happened in Philadelphia, can't remember the name of the gentleman, I can find it and send a link. That happened by US mail. So I think that concerning ballot harvesting within the section of drop boxes doesn't do that full security about ballot harvesting justice. And those are my thoughts. I don't know if anybody wants to discuss or review.
Christina, I agree with you. I think I noticed that too, that it was mentioned in that section and seemed to tie that to drop boxes specifically. And I have seen no evidence, and nobody showed me any evidence that drop boxes somehow lead to ballot harvesting or even connected in any way to ballot harvesting. And as you noted, the one high profile case that came out of this year's primary was done via the US mail, not through drop boxes. So I totally agree with you. And until somebody shows me evidence that somehow those two things are connected, I don't like mentioning them in the same section or the same paragraph because of what it implies.
Well, I think the easiest solution to that is just to pull out references to ballot harvesting and save that for further discussions on. I mean, I think we need to talk about within the stuff about making sure people understand that they're supposed to return their ballot and only their ballot unless they're specifically authorized to return somebody else's. And there are people who would include that kind of behavior within a very broad definition of ballot harvesting. But I'm thinking what I'm hearing is we probably just want to pull that out and save that for another discussion. It would still not affect the drop boxes when we put notice that says you're only supposed to return your own, but we could otherwise pull the ballot harvesting concept back to a fuller discussion, because I think we ultimately would want to have something more definitive on that issue in a further report. But absolutely, it makes sense not to have that included in part of drop boxes in general. And it's a bigger issue than drop boxes. We saw in California, I think in 2020 that it was a big problem. And so I think that's an issue we probably need to look at more carefully and be more specific and more responsive in the future. So I don't have a real problem pulling that out for now at all. And I have also no problem in the Dropbox statute to make sure that we aren't inadvertently excluding or prohibiting 24-hour a day access to drop boxes that are set up in a location where that can happen. I mean, if it's in your courthouse and your courthouse is locked specific hours, then yeah, people can't get at it. But that's some little tweaks to just make sure we're not excluding that possibility with the 24-hour ones. But otherwise, the ballot harvesting, I think, makes perfect sense to pull back and set to the side for future discussion. And I'm hoping one of you were paying attention, because Pat and Joe, you both have your hands up. Who was first? Have like a thumb war and work it out that way.
You were first, Pat.
All right, thanks, Joe. I'll jump in real quick. Yeah, I guess two quick points. I also agree, that to punt on the harvesting conversation to another time, because one of the topics, one of the recommendations, of course, we haven't quite gotten to, I guess, yet is who can return a ballot. Obviously, right now you can't return your partner, your spouse's ballot, someone in your household. Now I will confess in this public meeting, I told my wife earlier, this fall, hey, I'm going up to City Hall. I'm going by the office. I can drop your ballot off as well at the drop box, just because it seemed like a common sense thing to do. So I think there's something to talk about there. What's that?
I'm turning you in.
Well, I realized before I walked out the door that I can't do that. At the same time, I don't think we're going to be codifying ballot harvesting, ballot collection the way California and Colorado does. So that's a definitely real discussion, and I think we should have that. And on the closing of the drop boxes, I noticed that as well. And if the closing language is going to be removed, something may have to go in there about the frequency with which the ballots are collected. Right. I think it also wouldn't be good policy to have ballots sitting in one of these drop boxes for like a week without them being collected. So I think that's probably something to discuss if we're going to tweak that language.
Okay. Joe?
On that subject, Pat, definitely there'd be good to have language on that because, if it comes into our office, we have 48 hours to respond or to change the status of that voter's ballot so they know we've received it. So to your point, waiting a week is not good policy for the voter. I would just respectfully disagree with the ballot harvesting language coming out. I would suggest possibly a change in the language of how we have it. I would actually lump it in with the vandalism and other irregularities, only because I know that the vandalism was a big topic for myself that I made that point many times. It's a concern that I have, a grave concern I feel, because that is a problem if that were to happen, that we would never be able to fully know who voted in that drop box and who used it. So that would be a major problem. But just because we don't have a news story talking about ballot harvesting being an issue with a drop box doesn't mean it doesn't exist or doesn't mean it can't exist. So respectfully, I would want to see that language stay in there, but just my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, if I could respond, I don't know. I won't speak for Christina. I don't know that I was necessarily, had a strong opinion about whether it should come out of the report altogether. I have a strong opinion about where it is in the report because it seems to connect ballot harvesting to drop boxes as if one is a result of the other. And I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that's true. So I understand that ballot harvesting is a concern. I concede that. And I don't, I'm not saying we should ignore it altogether. I don't like the idea of tying it to drop boxes as if that is an outcome of drop boxes, because I just don't agree that there's any evidence that that's true.
Ken.
In Montgomery County, our drop boxes are under electronic surveillance. And in this past election, we actually had them manned. So we had them for limited hours, Christina, but we had them manned. So I absolutely agree. And I don't understand the fixation with drop boxes and ballot harvesting. Ballot harvesting is illegal. If you were going to do it, you would go to a PO box. I don't know how many U.S. postal boxes there are in Montgomery County, but they are not under video surveillance. They are not manned. So I absolutely agree that putting it under the Dropbox section seems to link the two of them in a way that many continue to perpetuate, which we haven't seen in Montgomery County at all.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Jim.
Yes, I'm not going to say everything that everyone else has already said, except that I enjoy this discussion. I don't believe that there's any evidence that it happens more at drop boxes than it would. It would certainly be easier to do it at a blue box sitting outside of a postal service. But I do agree with Joe's comment that it's an important issue to election security and that it should be addressed perhaps under a different section where we're concerned more about security. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Yeah, and to Jim's point, I would give that point as well that I'm not suggesting that it's just around ballot harvesting is just around drop boxes. I just feel that I know how important a topic it was in discussion of the small group, and I hate to see it taken out completely because I do feel that it's something we have to keep at the forefront of possibilities for keeping the integrity of our election.
Okay. Christina.
I agree completely. I would not want ballot harvesting removed entirely from the report. I think it should go under a separate security section so that it covers all of the options for ballot harvesting, ballot security, and ensuring that we're not, as Jonathan had said, tying ballot harvesting to drop boxes as though that is the only way in which it could happen, because we all know that it is more prevalent with the USPS box.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing, and if this would work for all of you, is if we took the ballot harvesting, moved it into more of an overall security provision, not adding or subtracting from what's already been written, but noting that this is just a preliminary look at it, and we will be going into further depth, looking at ballot harvesting in the future. I mean, does that, oh, I'm sorry, Grant, you have your hand up too.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, ask Christina, what specific provision she is taking issue with? You said it's on page 36.
Yes, it was page 36 on the report. And under Dropbox,
Tracking.
no, under Dropbox security, page 36 of the report, not page 36 of the PDF. So if you're looking at the electronic PDF, it's a different page.
Oh, the first
It's on page 34 is where.
On mine,
Dropbox
under
security begins on page 33 and continues on to page 34.
You have the wrong printout, I think, Grant. But yes, I see where you mean.
It's on 36.
Yeah, it's on page 36 in the
Yeah,
third paragraph.
It's impossible to prevent ballot harvesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it says it under the Dropbox security section.
Right,
And that was
right.
my concern, was just that
Yeah.
it should be under the vote by mail section rather than under Dropboxes in itself.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that, Lisa.
Yeah, hi, I was just going to agree with Christine. I appreciate that she pointed that issue out in the report, and I agree. And Yvonne, I also agree that while it definitely should remain as a point in the report, it should not be tied to drop boxes.
Okay. So then, are you all comfortable if we do that then? If we make that more, move the ballot harvesting information to the more general security provisions with the comment that we're going to explore it more fully in a future report, but that this is something we need to address, but it's not just, I'm not even sure if I would say it was related to drop boxes at all. If we're going to take the language out of the drop box provision, I think we can just move it to the more general provisions saying this is an aspect of security that we need to research and develop further, but it is something we need to work on. Joe.
Yeah, just real quick, maybe an obvious point, but my reason for saying what I said in the chat box is it absolutely has to be in this report because it only really deals with the potential of it, only really deals with mail-in ballots. Obviously, in person, it's not an issue. But to your point, Yvonne, yeah, a separate item under security would make sense. But I do think it should also reference, because we've already seen it happen, not just, not specifically ballot drop boxes, but mail-in ballots as a whole, because we've already seen it occur with mail-in ballots at the U.S. Postal Service. So,
well, and Christina just sent a couple of links that we can pull and look at. Got to figure out procedurally how to do this, but what I'd like to try to do is memorialize what I think you're all saying, send it to you for a quick, yes, this is what we agreed to, and make that part of the report. I don't know about you guys, but I really want to see this report come out soon. So anything that would add a month or more to this process, I'm really trying to avoid. So with that said, yeah, I think we can write up a provision that will acknowledge ballot harvesting, talk about it. I just don't think we can come up with a legislative proposal in 2 weeks. So I think we can talk about the issue. We can acknowledge the issue, that it is a big issue. And we can say we're going to work on it some more. But I think it would be something that at this point would be part of our June report. So on that, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. I was just going to suggest maybe one potential is just to put it under the other mail-in ballot issues. I don't even know that it's a security issue so much as because we're talking about a behavior. It's more of an integrity issue than it is a security issue. So, maybe putting it under other ballot issues, integrity of mail balloting or something like that. I think it is a better fit because I would not view this as a security issue per se, but rather an election integrity issue.
I'm okay with that. Joe, what do you think about that? Would that work for you?
I guess, Jonathan, are you thinking like almost a recommendation number 5 in order to make it very clear and specific?
No, I don't. I think the issue itself probably requires more discussion from the work group, but putting it in the other issues as kind of like an integrity, part of that discussion, I guess, towards the end of the document where we talk about, I think we talk about prepaid postage and the tracking of ballots.
Yeah, and I would
sort of like an election integrity section there.
And I would put that first in that chapter.
Yeah.
If I were adding that in, I would make that the first subsection in that chapter. And I think that would work. But yeah, I think we're not far enough along in the discussion to make a definitive recommendation. I think we're close, but I don't think we're there yet. So I'd like to try to defer that aspect of it, but at the same time acknowledge that it is an issue, acknowledge that it's a concern we're going to address. Jonathan?
Yeah, no, and I was just going to say I agree with that. And if Commissioner Cantz and the others are okay with that, I do think it requires additional discussion because we want to talk about we had legislation introduced in this past session that would allow for immediate family members. Like I think we need to talk through that and figure out what is the best model here because I think everyone. Pat called himself out. I'm glad he did not violate the law. Otherwise, that would have been an admission on camera. But I don't think it's intuitive for spouses, for immediate family members. I don't think people think about that because they deliver each other's mail all the time, and unless they're really focused on this issue, they're probably not thinking about it. They're just grabbing a pile of mail and I'm going to take this to the post office, or in the case of the ballots, I'm going to take it to a drop box. And it isn't until they get there and someone perhaps confronts them that they realize it's even a controversy. So yeah, I think just putting it sort of in those other issues as a placeholder until we have a discussion about what is a how do we address this sort of immediate family member spouses, a practice that everyone does without doing what California does and allow it in a broader context. So are you okay with that, Commissioner Cantz?
No, but I'll go along with it because I'm feeling kind of cooperative today and
It's Christmas, Joe. Make it your Christmas present.
as long as I have the assurance, we will address it and acknowledge it in a future report. That's very important, I feel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a couple of things coming out of this meeting that are going to be high on our next agenda. Lisa.
I was just gonna concur with Joe, like we can't not mention it, so thank you.
Yep. No, we'll get that taken care of. Any other comments, concerns? Things we could potentially fix. There's a lot of issues. It's not like this board is going to finish its work and sit around and saying, now what do we do for, oh, I don't know, another 20 years or something like that. So obviously there's a lot we still need to look at and address, but the mail-in ballots just are such a timely issue that the sooner we can get this report and these recommendations out, the better. Even if they're not all picked up and become legislation, we can always fall back on my favorite saying, which is, I told you so. So having said all that,
Yvonne, if I might, I just want to say this, because I know Russ is on the call and Thomas, and I congratulations, Thomas, on your election. But I just want to say this. I see it more and more every day. The stress and the scrutiny that is placed upon our election workers is getting more and more difficult to keep and to gain those workers in the future. And I believe that we are nearing a very critical time in our history. If we don't get this thing fixed now, we are going to have serious issues with elections moving forward. And I'm saying that on the record because I believe it in my heart of hearts. We are closer now to a problem than we've ever been before. And we've got to start, look, we all have our partisan ideas, I get that, and I won't back down on them either. But we've got to use common sense to approach legislation that is dealing with elections and figure out a way to make things happen. And I'm hopeful, I'm praying and hopeful that with a new administration and the legislature will come together and try their best to fix some of these small problems one by one, if that's what it takes, because we've got to get this resolved or we will not be able to hire election workers in the future. That's all I'm going to say.
I think you've got a full room full of nodding heads on that one, Joe. And one of the reasons why we drafted each one of these proposals as separate legislation is because we understand on a topic that's this big, you can't put it all together. There are too many varying opinions. So you do it piecemeal, you do it one piece at a time. And hopefully when the dust settles, you've got the changes you need. So I think everybody's in agreement with you, Joe. Having said all of that, can we get with the changes we just talked about, the ballot harvesting discussion and the 24-hour accessibility of drop boxes, acknowledgement, and I want to say there was one other thing, but no, I don't remember what it was. I want to ask you all to approve the report, but I'm going to let Lisa talk first.
Yeah, was the points that Christina just made, along with your suggestions, Joe's points about the ballot harvesting, and also back to the beginning, the mail ballot deadline recommendation.
Oh, yes, yes.
And to apply and receive, yes.
Yes, thank you. I knew there was one at the very beginning, but my brain was just going blank. Yes, so with those changes that we've discussed here today, we'd like to get approval to release the report. as with the amendments we've discussed. So could I again see a show of hands to approve the release of the report? Yeah, definitely more hands up, considerably more hands up. Thank you. Yes, we're going to call that approved. Thank you very much, all of you. Feel free now to tell the world how wonderful we are and what good work we do. I will point out that in this particular document, it really was a very collaborative effort between Grant and Stephen and myself. I, of course, being the egomaniac that I am, retain final editing rights, but the guys put a lot of hard work into this, a lot of research, a lot of writing, and a lot of just listening to the tapes of our last meeting and making sure we were accurate in what we thought we had heard from everybody. So this was really a collaborative effort, and we really appreciate all the work you guys have put into this, which makes it a lot easier for us to be able to pull it all together because you give us the material we need to work with. So thank you all very much. Jonathan and then Russ.
Thank you, Yvonne. And I just wanted to follow up on what Commissioner Cant said. I totally agree that, I was just recently on Friday, I was in Hershey meeting with the Eastern Association of County Election Personnel. And on Tuesday, I was in Clarion County meeting with the Western Association. And certainly he speaks to something that I've heard from election directors across the Commonwealth about how much more difficult and how much more scrutiny election directors are facing, county election staff and poll workers for that matter, and how difficult that makes it to recruit people, to retain people. And so I totally agree with him that we need to address these issues and try to focus on I understand how the legislature works, and I know everything is a negotiation, but there are some things I think there's broad agreement on, and it would be great in the upcoming session, with the governor-elect and the new legislature. Hopefully there's a chance to get some of these things done that there's broad agreement on, to alleviate some of at least the administrative pressures that are placed on counties, and perhaps that takes us a step in the right direction.
Russ. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Yvonne. I just wanted to note to the rest of the board that I am, in fact, the speaker's designee on this board. So this may be my last board meeting, but I just wanted to let the rest of the board know that I thoroughly enjoyed this opportunity to exchange ideas and to work together for the betterment of Pennsylvania. I want to wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas.
Same to you, Russ. Lisa.
I just wanted to say, I know I mentioned it in the beginning, but what this board certainly has proven is there is both an appetite and an ability for folks to work in a bipartisan manner, to look with a common sense lens at the changes that need to happen, to ensure voters and Pennsylvanians that we are committed to making sure that they can have confidence in their elections going forward. And it has been a pleasure to work on this board along with each of you. And I look forward to continuing the work, and happy holidays.
Yeah, I wanted to, I didn't do it instantaneously, but Russ, thank you very much for your efforts with this board and the really valuable contributions you've made to the conversations and the discussions. and not in small part to the cordiality and open discussions that we've been able to have. So we do appreciate that you've been here. We will miss you. And, you know, good luck with your new jobs. And also from the commission, happy holidays. Enjoy your break if you get one. And generally, thank you. We're pretty happy here. So thank you very much. Lisa, did you have more to say, or is your hand still just up?
Sorry.
That's okay. All right. So having said all of that and feeling, you know, very full of myself today, Joe, you have something to say, and then Ken, if you want to declare.
Okay.
I'll be happy to turn it over to Mr. Chairman as soon as I say, please, for everyone, wish you the best this Christmas, but I also want to remind everyone to share with your loved ones that you love them every chance you get, because you never know when it will be the last time.
You've been on our thoughts, Joe. Yeah, we know. Somebody was concealed. Oh, Ken, you're supposed to go home.
Yeah. Joe, I mean, we've seen each other, but we will continue to hold your family up in prayer. I know this is a very difficult time for you, and it'll be a difficult holiday season, and you'll continue to be in our thoughts and prayers. Representative Diamond, I'm going to say on the record, we're going to miss you. You know, I've been so happy at how well this board has worked together. Even when we disagree, we're not disagreeable. We've had collegial conversations and issues across the board. And I echo what Jonathan said, you know, it's because we all care about elections and we want to get this right. And I agree with my colleague, Commissioner Camps, that we have to get this right. And I will echo that I hope in the new legislative session and our new governor, that they can put some of these things aside and just do the common sense fixes that we need, certainly before the 2024 election. But I want to wish everyone a very happy holiday season. I want to thank the staff for the great job that they do herding us together and keeping us together. I know there's been a lot of work that's been done in the small groups as well. So I just want to thank everyone for the time that they've been putting into this, and have a blessed and happy holiday season.
And are we adjourned?
And I will adjourn the meeting.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.